That is one of maybe the biggest economic stories of the last decade, and there is news about it today. When Greece first had to turn to those EU partners for help in bailing out its massive national debt, many predicted a financial crisis that would spell the end of the entire Eurozone. But today, Athens officially exited that bailout program, surprising many of the more pessimistic predictions. But that doesn't mean an end to Greece's economic problems or of the political challenges facing the EU as a result. Joining us right here in the studio, our economy correspondent Asher Westropp-Evans, and in Athens, journalist Nikolia Apostolu. Nikolia, let me start with you. Is there a feeling that Greece is actually out of danger, or is this a just symbolic exit, but only the beginning of another long road ahead?
Well, for the regular people, it's still really tough. There is still 20% unemployment. 1 out of 3 people are living under the poverty line. So it's really gloomy right here.
But what about the attitude of the Greek government? Is there a sense of relief that it can go out and borrow now? And is there a danger it may get carried away again, perhaps end up over-borrowing now that they have the freedom to do so?
Well, the government is going to project this as a Greece's achievement, as a success story, that Greece managed to pull through and is now exiting the crisis. But the truth is, people are still, don't believe that. They don't see it in their everyday life. In terms of spending now, budget cuts have been cut. Sorry, not budget cuts. Public budget has been cut. And the EU will be overseeing Greece's economy and how the government spends it. So, like in September, I think it was on the 10th of September, the first team of bureaucrats from the EU will come to oversee what Greece will be doing next year.
Well, Asher, as Nikolia just mentioned, the EU is still going to have this role of overseeing the watchdog of what happens next. How is the EU reacting to this moment?
Well, exactly right. And because the EU has such an important stake in the game, they're keen to market this as a positive and upbeat moment, a new chapter, as it were. And we heard earlier today from Pierre Moscovici, the European Commissioner for Economic and Financial Affairs. We can take a little listen to what he had to say.
It is still 273 billion euros of financial aid that were given to Greece in exchange for reforms, which were difficult and painful, and I would be the last to ignore that. But it must be said, for the Eurozone, for Greece, this is an important day, and it must be recognized as such, because now Greece can stand on its own 2 feet and will be a Eurozone country like the rest, even though in the last 10 years it was following a program and being controlled.
Asher, first of all, we have to give credit. There was a lot of skepticism that the EU, that the Eurozone was going to survive this crisis. Criticism of people like Angela Merkel and the tough measures she took on Greece. But still, the EU this has left a changed EU, a chastened EU.
Absolutely right, but also a more aware EU, an EU who now has recognized the fragilities of their own coalition and partnership and what needs to be worked on here. Coming out of this process, the EU has established a bailout fund for any future countries that are in need of this sort of bailout, something they simply didn't have in the past. And in fact, prior to this crisis and prior to the Eurozone crisis generally, none of the EU treaties specifically dealt with bailouts, meaning that the EU countries were free to let other EU member states collapse at their own peril. Right. Obviously, that is not to their advantage. As we saw with this EU crisis, it threatened to bring down the entire currency and perhaps the entire Eurozone should Greece collapse. But it meant that this sense of solidarity was brought back to the EU, and now they've really, 8 years on, hopefully seem to have learned a lesson, at least on paper.
Well, Nikolia, so Asher is describing that sense of solidarity when we're looking at Greece going through stormy waters, to say the least, going through several bailouts. Are there still calls in Greece to leave the Eurozone?
There are still people that believe that if Greece had left the Eurozone in the very beginning of the crisis, it would have been better, because average incomes went down from $11,000 from $52,000 to $11,000 in just 9 years. And because we're seeing austerity will be implemented until 2060. Greece and the EU agreed that Greece will have a 3.5% surplus until 2022 and a 2% surplus until 2060. So that's 40 years of austerity. It's like a whole generation of children.
And Nikolia, there is an argument to be made, of course, that if Greece had its own currency back, the drachma, it could have devalued that rather than going through some of that tough medicine it had to swallow. Do you hear voices there specifically saying that Greece should reinstate its own currency, that famous drachma?
Well, among politicians and among the parties, there's like one or two only calling for the drachma. So, and they don't even get into the parliament. But, you know, people in their discussions believe that it might have been better. But it's also like the fear of the unknown, because you really don't know what would have happened. We might have Greece becoming Turkey and facing the crisis that Turkey is dealing with now.
Asher, it's interesting to look at this now when they're trying to describe the EU as painting this as a positive picture, and we see maybe Greece sort of out of the woods, maybe the EU sort of out of the woods, but in the bigger picture, the EU may be more divided than ever.
Absolutely right. And we come to that question of solidarity. Now, over this Eurozone crisis, as I stated, Europe really came together and they were able to lend to Greece in very favourable terms and really set up these great sort of bailout funds, which, for better or worse, maybe it was a tough pill to swallow, but got Greece out of this crisis. Would we see the same thing in today's EU? It's hard to tell. With the populist governments in Austria, Italy, Poland, Hungary. I mean, would we see the same sort of EU sort of sense of solidarity?
How about this, Farhani? At the time when this crisis started 8 years ago, there was so much concern that Greece, a country, relatively small economy in the EU, on the fringe, literally, of Europe, would leave. Now we see Great Britain, one of the biggest economies in the EU, a pillar of it, leaving.
Everything is relative.
So just the irony now that Greece, 8 years later, is in the EU and Great Britain looks to be on its way out.
Absolutely. But, you know, as we said, this could be the trial by fire that the EU really needs to cement the solidarity and test some of these long-standing treaties to see if they actually have any valuable standing. And it seems, at least for the moment, again, on paper, that the EU has really come together. They've gotten through this particular crisis. And while they're definitely facing a slew of other political crises, economically, they seem to be much stronger.
But now, as you mentioned, the road is still going full speed ahead. The EU is still sort of the parent here, policing the spending of Greece going forward.